A lot of you know it's a big day. We're celebrating the work of our Environmental Justice Center, which has retired. So we're going to reflect on some of what was accomplished through more than 3 decades of advocacy and work here. Joy gave me a curveball because I have to figure out, if I'm going off the lectionary cycle, how do I pick a Bible reading for the day? There isn't anyone assigned that I'm supposed to look at. So I chose a psalm, which is actually number 65. The 5 got cut off in the bulletin. But I'm going to start us with just an excerpt from Ross Gay, Inciting Joy, Essays on Joy. This, not about joy. She's incited all the time. But he's reflecting on gardening here, which seemed like an appropriate theme to start us with. And he notices the ways that gardeners share stuff with each other, bring things to each other and ask things from each other. And he says, and why is this back and forth? Another word for which is sharing, another phrase for which is mutual aid. Why is this the gardener's disposition, or maybe more the point, practice? Because a garden, a healthy, thriving garden, tells us to. I suspect, whether we know it or not, we're just emulating the garden, which is a repository of sharing. And he goes on to tell the story of how during the start of the pandemic, he found a 4 or 5-year-old bag of sunflower seeds, and he decided to just toss them into a ditch and see what happened. And he said the earth brought forth its bounty, shared it with him, shared it with the birds and the animals. That seemed a good place to start. You know what? I need to switch. I thought Dan's magic trick was going to work, but not this time. Psalm 65, which is a psalm that reflects on God and the world and humanity. One of the things we notice through the work of the Environmental Justice Center is that we fall short of what we owe the earth. So we can hear maybe a little of that echoing in here. Praise is due to you, O God, and to you we shall perform our vows, O you who answer prayer. To you all people will come. When our deeds of iniquity overwhelm us, you forgive us. Happy are those whom you choose and bring near to live in your courts. We will be satisfied with the goodness of your house, your holy temple. By awesome deeds you answer us with deliverance, O God of our salvation. You are the hope of all the ends of the earth and of the farthest seas. By your strength you establish the mountains. You're girded with might. You silence the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves, the tumult of the peoples. Those who live at earth's farthest bounds are awed by your signs. You make the gateways of the morning and evening shout for joy. But then there's a turn to the quieter part of God, the part that feels less frightening, perhaps. You visit the earth and water it. You greatly enrich it. The river of God is full of water. You provide the people with grain, for this is how you have ordered it. You water its furrows abundantly, setting its ridges, softening it with showers, blessing its growth. You crown the year with bounty. Your wagon tracks overflow with richness. The pastures of the wilderness overflow. The hills clothe themselves with joy. The meadows dress themselves with flocks. The valleys deck themselves out with grain. They shout and sing together for joy. A vision of the partnership of earth and God. The queen is dead. Long live the queen. Or maybe the king is dead. Long live the king. I don't know. I will tell you. I know you're all wondering, what is he saying? Sometimes it's tricky to figure out how to start a sermon. So I was just thinking about that this week. Somehow it sprung to mind, and I remembered I was very confused by it as a child with a sort of literal understanding. The queen is dead. Long live the queen. Like, what is that? I don't know how to feel. Is she dead or not? Is the queen like cryogenically frozen, thaw her out later when we need, or did the queen become a vampire? She's dead, long live the queen. Or maybe it's, may her memory live long inside of us. It took me farther into adulthood than I'd like to admit, before I realized that this was a saying, a formalized saying about two different people. The old queen had died. There's a new one. Long live the new one. There's continuity. The world isn't falling apart. Don't judge me. I'm an American. What do I know about the monarchy? I can't account for my lack of interpretation. But I can tell you, Joy Berge especially is probably wondering what I'm doing talking about queens at the beginning of this sermon. We've been promoting today as a celebration of the Environmental Justice Center, which she was the director for quite a number of years, having taken over the mantle from Marianne Fleur. And she told me unequivocally, do not give me flowers or anything like that today. But you didn't say no tiara. No, just kidding. It started with a theological provocation, which is just a fancy way of saying a new way to think about God. But if anyone ever tells you that the images we use for God don't matter, maybe you'll remember this story. It was the late 1980s, and a prior pastor, Hal Tausig, and his wife, Susan, they went on a retreat where they learned from the theologian Matthew Fox, who does a lot of work on creation spirituality. Like, how does it change us as people of faith if we spend less time thinking about God as a big white dude with a huge beard flexing his muscles on high? It's not impressive. What if we spend less time thinking of God like that and more time thinking about God as something like the groundwater that wells up to nurture and nourish the earth and sustain us? How might that help us take more seriously that we're called to protect the earth instead of to dominate it and exploit it? And the next thing you know, this nice little church in the northwest corner of Philadelphia is starting to explore these weird ideas. Hal posted an invitation in the Chestnut Hill Local to start up a discussion group. That's how Marianne Fleur got connected with us, and eventually Brian as well. And Joy and a few other folks from inside the church and some folks from outside the church got together and started reading and talking. They began a group called New Moon Dead Wood, and they started exploring new ways of connecting to nature, like going out into the Wissahickon and sharing communion, and noticing that the water out there is the same as the water we use for baptism. As you know, the sacred isn't contained just inside a building of stone. That's the power of an idea, a new or a new old way of thinking about God and spirituality. Folks started dreaming about putting on an interfaith symposium that would get other people of faith starting about these ideas, something that would promote the spiritual importance of caring for creation. Hal hired Marianne to do some groundwork, answering phones, editing grant proposals that he was putting together. This is how what was first called the Center for the Celebration of Creation gestated. Marianne was the center's first director, though she's more self-effacing and says what she did was answer phones and do office work. We know what the real truth is. They started putting out a publication, a bulletin insert called the Canticle for Creation, which they sold regionally and even nationally. Each issue focused on a theme, something from butterflies to the Chesapeake Bay to climate change, each offering information and some action steps and a spiritual component. Somewhere in 2001 or 2002, Joy's participation in the church and in the Center for the Celebration of Creation prompted her to make a radical life change. She left a job in the corporate world and was surprised to find herself doing lobbying on behalf of the earth, I think. Earth needs more lobbyists, it turns out. This included freelance work with a number of interfaith and environmental organizations. It also involved work in and for this congregation, doing grant writing organizing people in the congregation to the work of creation care and environmental justice. Ultimately, the Center for the Celebration of Creation took on a new name, the Environmental Justice Center at Chestnut Hill United Church. That name helped to push to the front our conviction that had long been present in the center's work, which is namely that encountering the world and learning to love and care for the natural world is a spiritual necessity, but so is the work of environmental justice. Those two can't be and should not be separated. We cannot properly care for creation, and we cannot be in right relationship with the God of creation if we're not also attending to the ways that we human beings harm the earth and how that harm disproportionately impacts people who are already vulnerable. So my task this morning was impossible. How do you sum up more than 30 years of advocacy and action and ministry in one reasonably length sermon? You probably don't. So instead, we're going to share some pictures, which don't span the breadth of the center's work, but they give us a good sampling of some of the things that have happened here. And I'll just talk you through one at a time. They'll come up on the screen so we can see them. Some number of years ago, we helped organize electronics recycling drives at 15 different houses of worship. We also had a techno trash collection here to help keep electronic waste and toxic waste out of landfills and of the recycling streams. This is Dan Guest. He looks about the same. John Guest and Anthony Clementi are a little bit older now. The one on the right is a dad, so we hope that he's older now, right? So we trained him up young, involved in the care of the earth. Next one, please. 2013. This is Joy with somebody in his finery. This is an Orthodox priest and an interfaith group, part of an ecumenical effort to stop a proposed Pebble Bay mine in Bristol Bay, Alaska. That mine would have ruined a wild salmon fishery that was critical to the local economy and to the spiritual life of the local Native Alaskans. That advocacy did successfully halt that project. Next picture. Also in 2013, a group from church got themselves down to D.C. to join thousands of other people protesting the opening of the Keystone Pipeline. And we can do the next one as well. I think this is from that same gathering. It took 10 years of political struggle, but in 2021, the permit for that pipeline was revoked. Next picture. In 2014, a group of us headed to New York City to march in the streets with 100,000 of our closest friends or so, demanding meaningful action on climate change. Surprise, Francesca, there you are. The next picture. In 2015, this is a low-light situation, so it's a little blurry, but Joy took Peter Bixler in tow to Pittsburgh, where he testified at an EPA hearing and wound up quoted on the front page of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette the following day. We've had a lot of interaction with politicians, some real-world interaction, postcard drives that Joy organized, a Valentine effort that spanned all ages. Joy says the highlight of her career was taking an interfaith group to meet with Senator Casey. There was a nun in that group who looked that devout Catholic senator in his eye and said, "Will you commit to voting on the right side of this issue?" And he hasn't looked back yet. So the next picture, here he is. It's hard to pick him out. He's the one in the suit there next to Linda, who's at the podium. 2016, at a Moms and Kids Care About Climate Change event at 30th Street Station. It's hard to see, but on the right is a young Claire holding a sign there So Claire, thank you for being a part of that effort. And then the next picture is also in D.C. with Senator Casey. Karen Taratuski, who's part of this congregation on the right. She was one of 6 healthcare professionals who testified in D.C. about the need for real action on climate change. Next photo. Hannah and Ian show their love and support for a clean power plan. This is part of the Valentine's effort that we reached out to our senators with. Next picture. We got kids involved in that as well. So here's 2 Valentines from one of our kids to our 2 senators with some helpful suggestions about not polluting and stopping cutting down trees. Of course, not all of the Valentines were messages of support. Can we get the next picture? This is the one that we delivered to Senator Toomey, asking him not to break our hearts, even though, like all the best pop songs, you know they're going to break your heart anyway. But you sing the song because the song must be sung. He broke our hearts even after Joy and that group of healthcare professionals who got to meet with Senator Casey were declined a meeting with Senator Toomey, but nonetheless saw him in the hallway and cornered him. Joyce has politely ganged up on him. Next picture, please. Here's the sign hanging up here, the sign that's on the front of the bulletin. I don't know if the sign on the bulletin. May was up on the steps with Priscilla and with her mom Annie. May is on the cover of the bulletin as well. She's just not external to Annie yet. It's kind of a fun overlapping today. So this sign and this group of people from church, again, some of you here today, helped to voice our convictions out in public after the horrifying 2016 election. The next picture is Sandy West. Sandy, you didn't know you were going to be up on the wall today. In 2019, connecting with the U.S. Representative Madeleine Dean at an event in Valley Forge, a rally calling for better protection of our waters. Next picture, the Environmental Justice Center also got us engaged in some hands-on work, getting us out into the world to improve it and just to remember why we are in love with it. But here is Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service 2020. Aaron Landis, Dan Rauscher, and Joy out helping to pick up some of the trash. And then here, the next one is Joy advising Pope Francis on what should go in his encyclical on the environment. He did a pretty good job with it, so way to pass on the wisdom, Joy. Finally, an enduring image of our public witness, Chestnut Hill United Church says, act on climate. That's all the pictures. Thank you. So, three decades, or a little more than that, really. That's a lot of creation care and environmental justice agitation. And now the Environmental Justice Center has run its course. Or to pick up a little bit of biblical language, it has fought the good fight, it has finished the race, it has kept the faith. This past October, Joy said that she's retiring from being the director. The money that was left in its account, money that had been used for any number of purposes, such as paying guest speakers, paying membership dues, helping cover some of the costs associated with renewable energy here. Money that was left was to be given to our trustees, who are going to put it into a more efficient boiler, which will help us use less energy and reduce our carbon footprint. So the leftover funds are still doing some of the work that needs to happen. How can the Environmental Justice Center have finished its race when the world is still heating? I mean, just last week, research came out showing that the massive ice sheet in Greenland is 2.7 degrees warmer now than its average temperature in the 20th century was. The scientists working on that say that the decade of 2001 to 2011 was the warmest of the last 1,000 years, which is bad news for the planet's coastlines, because Greenland holds enough ice to raise the world's seas by 20 feet? How can the Environmental Justice Center, Marianne helped get started, that Joy continued, that many of us were part of, how can it have finished its race when just this past week, Vanessa Nakate of Uganda and Greta Thunberg of Sweden and other young climate activists were at Davos pleading with world economic and political leaders to take climate change seriously? I'm glad that you asked. The Environmental Justice Center is not going to exist in the same form, but that does not mean that its legacy disappears. A new boiler will be its legacy. Renewable energy at the church is part of its legacy. The people who found their voices here and spoke them out in the world, speaking about climate change and environmental justice, are part of its legacy. The work doesn't stop just because the name disappears from the organizational flowchart. And Joy is staying engaged with the newly created title of Environmental Justice Liaison. She is using that to sign us on to important things. I offer this in her own words. She wrote to me, "This church continues to be part of 4 coalitions: the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed, the Clean Water Coalition, working to protect the Chesapeake watershed, the Pennsylvania Clean Energy Hub, and Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light. Through these affiliations, we continue to weigh in publicly and directly with elected officials, reminding them of their moral responsibility to protect all of God's people, and God's plants and animals as well, from the threats imposed by human activity." The work doesn't stop. The need doesn't go away. Our voice is still out there, and our values still take life among us. Come this Lent, we'll share a resource from Creation Justice Ministries with everyone that gives daily readings and action steps. One format of our ministry steps aside so that whatever is next can step up. What I hear in all of this is where I'm tying it together. The Environmental Justice Center is dead. Long live the Environmental Justice Center. This is God's good news. Amen.